The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The Pharisees went out and took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. When Jesus realized this, he withdrew from that place. Many people followed him, and he cured them all. But he warned them not to make him known. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom I delight. I shall place my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not contend or cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope. The Gospel of the Lord. In our first reading, and in our psalm, talks about splitting the Red Sea in twain, in two, so that the Jews can go through it. And so the beach road was split in twain, so the bikers could make through it, and the cars couldn't make it through there. So anyway, today we always hear that Jesus is meek and humble, and we have it in our songs and we read about it. But today is a really good example of Jesus' meekness and his humbleness in today's gospel. And it's from Matthew chapter 12, and it's like the third independent piece of that chapter. And the first piece is Jesus is in the field with the apostles, and it's a Sabbath day. They're hungry, and they're breaking off ears of grain. So I'm thinking corn, and they're eating it in the fields. And the Pharisees always happen to be there whenever he's doing something on the Sabbath, and they just blast Jesus for allowing his disciples to do what is forbidden, to work on the Sabbath, to break those ears of corn off the stalks and eat them. And Jesus explains he is the Lord of the Sabbath. He's telling them he is God. And the Pharisees doesn't settle well with the Pharisees. And the next independent story there in that chapter is he goes from there on the Sabbath to the synagogue on the Sabbath. And there's a man with a withered hand in the synagogue, and he cures him. And that upsets the Pharisees too, because they consider Jesus' miracles work. And so the Pharisees they're blind to the miracles that God is performing through Jesus, and they're deaf to the words that Jesus is speaking. And the Pharisees decide to do violence to Jesus. It starts off, they're planning to kill him. They're going to plot to kill him. They just can't put up with somebody who so flagrantly, disregards the rules that they have set up for the Sabbath. And Jesus could have responded in kind. He could have armed his disciples and gone after the Pharisees or started something independent, but no. He's meek and humble. He withdrew from there, and people followed him, and he cured them all. And then there's the quote from Isaiah that's part of that reading. It's a short reading this morning, but there's a quote from Isaiah, and it talks about, it's a prophecy about Jesus and how meek and humble he is, It says, he will not contend or cry out. A bruised reed he will not break. And so it talks about his how humble and gentle he is. But there's a curious thing in that quote, that prophecy from Isaiah. It mentions the word Gentile twice. In the very short quote. It says, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. Remember, a Gentile is somebody that's a non-Jew, a pagan, a non-believer, if you will. And the other one is, and in his name the Gentiles will hope. And so that's a clear message that Jesus' message of salvation is for the Gentiles too. It's for all peoples of all nations. Everyone is included in God's plan of salvation. And as difficult as it might be to think about this, that's the same meaning in our first reading from Exodus, where the Jews are finally leaving Egypt and heading out into the desert. And the message there is that God's adoption of the Jews and taking care of them, His promises that He's made to them, the covenants He's made with them, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all those patriarchs that the Jews have, they're also going to be given to the Gentiles as well. And the Egyptians are not ready for the message. And the Jews need to be more prepared so they can share and spread that message. But God grows His kingdom slowly, just like the mustard seed growing. And the Jews, while they were in Egypt, went from about 70 people over those 430 years to, it said, 600, about 600 men. And then that's not counting the little ones and stuff. So maybe 1 million people plus all the rest. In other words, they grew to a nation in the fertile valley of the Nile. So God's plan, it's growing continually. And so I think for us, what's the message for us in all of these readings here today is that God has given us gifts. Each one of us has gifts and talents. And those gifts and talents are given to us so that we can help do our part in growing the kingdom of God as it continues to grow with God's will. And so today, perhaps we should ask God for the grace to open up our hearts so that we too can be meek and humble of heart and share the good news with others that we know to help grow the kingdom of God.